Welcome to the European Parliament here in Brussels and a new edition of the European Report. My name is Tomas Sandell and I'm the founding director of the European Coalition for Israel. This month we say a special welcome to the newly appointed chair of the European Parliament Delegation to Israel, that is Member of European Parliament Hildegard Bentele from Germany. Last time you were a guest here in our program was some 6 months ago when you had been newly re-elected for the second term to the European Parliament. But then, of course, the world was a different place, especially after the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. There has been a lot of what I would call meta changes in the world. But also in Germany, your native country, we have just had elections. And in this edition of the European Report, we are going to look at the implications of the elections in Germany, but also more broadly, the changes which we see in the world and how they are affecting the European Union and the Middle East. Let us start with something, before we dive into these questions more in detail, let us start with something very fresh. Just a few hours ago, you hosted Israeli Minister of Economics and Industry, Nir Barkat, former mayor of Jerusalem. Please, can you summarize your impressions after this very important visit, and what do you would say are the concrete takeaways after the delegation meeting a few hours ago?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to report a little bit about this really, as you said, very important event, because only a week after the EU-Israel Association Council took place, we could host here the Minister for Economy with a very important information also for Europe, because he presented the reform of standardization, which he brought forward in the last 2 years. That means that imports and exports from the EU to Israel and Israel to the EU will be much easier. So that also is a very big benefit for consumers. And I was very glad to have this very good news for the European market, but also for the Israeli market, as well as the general economic development in Israel, which is very positive. And since Europe is in a recession and is looking for new economic opportunities and also for diversification, that was very good news. And we could, have a very good and fruitful exchange with a lot of colleagues from the European Parliament who took a huge interest to meet Minister Barkat.
Yes, of course, as you mentioned during that meeting, this is very welcome news in an international system where we are talking about tariffs, not free trade. So I think Israel and the European Union can really make a difference in this respect. And I also think it's important, and it has been mentioned, that when we speak about Israel, it's not only about war, it's not only about the situation in Gaza. Israel is something much more than that. And in a time that we are living in all of Europe right now, I think Israel is really a beacon of light, if I may use that expression, when it comes to their remarkable resilience.
Absolutely.
Because when we look at OECD statistics, when it comes to you have nativity, birth rates, even index as to happy nations. Israel is the country in the whole of OECD which have the highest birth rates, which implies that there is optimism for the future. Yeah. But also the fact that given their very peculiar situation, they are, according to these indexes, one of the most happiest people in the world. Finland, of course, being number one, but I think they're still within number 5. But MEP Bentele, you represent Germany. Let us take a few moments to speak about the situation in Germany. You just came through an election. Some even called it a historic election. And in the next few weeks, hopefully, you will be forming a new government with Mr. Merz from your party as the next chancellor. I think that is as much as we know. But how would you comment the German elections? How do you think Germany will change in the coming years because of the election results? And do you expect these changes to also affect the European Union and perhaps even the wider Middle East?
Yeah, I would say Germany is at crossroads because we really lived early elections, which is very unusual for Germany because we're very stable and we run until the end of a term usually. Yeah. But the old coalition failed because of budget problems or budget battles. And this is why we have new elections. And they couldn't fall, worse because we do not have a government, which is really a problem at the moment. As you can see, you mentioned the new Trump administration is in place, making a lot of important decisions, and Germany is not at the table. So this is why we see the French president and the UK Prime Minister, talking to the US on one of the biggest concerns currently, which is, the ongoing war in Ukraine. And also, the position of the US towards Ukraine and towards NATO and securities towards Europe. So a lot of things are changing. And this is why I would say it's a bad moment that we do not have yet a government. But I understood Friedrich Merz in a way that he wants to have quick negotiations with gladly only one coalition partner, because this was a very important outcome of the elections, that we can form a government only with one partner. So it should be more stable than with two partners. Nevertheless, the majority is pretty thin. It's only 12 votes. So we really need discipline between the two partners. And now we talk also again about money, about budget, about rearming, our armies, because we could see that, unfortunately, the Trump administration is backing off from its support towards Ukraine. That means that Europe has to step up. And this is the current situation we are in. But of course, we have to form the government, and there will be also a lot of task forces now dealing with all these issues. But we have a lot of pressure to come to terms and to form a stable government. And I can see already now, because Friedrich Merz took a strong stance, for example, at the Munich Security Conference, he met a lot of leaders already, and he pronounced himself on several issues, also on Israel. He was very, I would say, positive, and he had a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu at a very early stage when he won the election. So reaffirming, the close ties with Israel, and I think we will see a change in policies towards Israel, a more pro-Israel stand, I would say. And this will reflect also with regard to funding, with regard to voting in the United Nations and so on, a stance also towards the ICC. So. But we have to see, and this will be an important question, to whom of the two partners will go the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is pretty open. I hope that after a long, long period of time, as we as Christian Democrats didn't have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it would make a lot of sense, because foreign policy is really very important currently, and we need a very close cooperation between the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister. So it would make a lot of sense to keep it in our camp.
As a non-German, as a Finnish citizen and a European citizen, we wish you best of luck. When we have seen historically, we recall always when there was a problem about funding, the EU budget, Germany at the end of the day would come in and solve the situation. This is of course not possible in the future, but let me as a non-German say thank you to Germany for keeping this integration project together by being very generous over the years. Going from Germany perhaps over the Atlantic to Washington, and since we last met, there's been an election, a new sheriff in town, as they say in Washington, and there seems to be breaking news every week. Most recently,
every day, almost.
I was going to say every day, and most recently, a very chaotic press conference with the president of Ukraine. What is your assessment? And I understand in Europe, we need to be diplomatic what statements we do. But is there any reflections that you would do less than 2 months of Trump in the office, and especially how can Europe and how can Germany, what can we actually do to normalize the situation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we have to step up with regard to defense. So it's very clear we'll have the Hague summit, NATO summit in June, I think. And President Trump has made it very clear that we have to step up our commitments. Yeah. So we have to, put money where our mouth is. I mean, we didn't expect that the United States would, really stop the financial support to Ukraine. This came as a shock, I would say. We were all hoping that this would not come, because this now really means that Europe has to step in. Also, I think with regard, to peace negotiations or ceasefire negotiations, because we haven't seen anything between President Trump, President Putin. There's no concrete outcome, and we are really afraid that we have a clear view that without Ukraine there should be no negotiations, because Ukraine needs to be at the table. So we have a lot of, disputes between the United States and Europe currently, but I think. For example, an issue I've been dealing with personally, critical raw materials. There was about to agreement to be signed, and I support, what Prime Minister Starmer said. This deal should be signed. We need to have an engagement of the U.S. and Ukraine. We need cooperation, economic cooperation, financial support. However, so we should keep the dialogue. I would not give up on the dialogue, and I think that's also the stance of the new German government. We always said we, listen to the U.S. We want to have the U.S. on board, but it's very clear. And President Trump made it clear in a very, I would say, frank way that we have to step up. And this is, I think, also a chance, for the European Union to take care of its own security. But we know that President Putin is a very tough cookie. So, so I think it's better, to unite the West and stay united. So, and I hope in the next days and months to come, weeks to come, that there will be a normalization also in this regard.
I think it was Ronald Reagan, the late Ronald Reagan, who said it takes two to tango. Yes. And I think Europe is really trying its best for the moment. But as you say, it's not easy.
No.
But at least when it comes to the Middle East, I believe that there's some convergence with parts of this European Parliament and the side that you represent in how we could proceed, especially in relation to UNRWA and what we could call the defunding of UNRWA. In Europe, of course, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, Italy have taken a similar path. Has the time come also for the EU to finally withdraw from UNRWA and replace it with something else?
I'm very much advocating for this, and I'm trying, step by step. For example, with regard to the upcoming budget resolution, we have prepared an amendment which was signed by a huge majority of at least German Christian Democrats, which we will put forward also to the broader EPP. And we ask for a phasing out of UNRWA funding and redirecting of funding to other aid organizations, because we do not want to stop humanitarian aid into Gaza, but we are, of course, very clear that UNRWA is not a reliable partner anymore. We have seen this from the Knesset decision, and there was no reversal of this decision. I think it's very clear, and we should accept this and not ignore it. But I have to tell you, it's pretty tough. If I look into the conclusions of the last Association Council to change the position of the European Commission and of the European Council. I'm working on the European Parliament. This is my field of activities, but I will also work back home in Germany. And I have the feeling that in this regard, with the new government, there will be a different policy on UNRWA. I think there's a lot of sensitivity about it. I know many members of Bundestag who advocate for defunding UNRWA. So I think there's a chance that also Germany might go into the camp of those member states you were mentioning. And also, impacting on the European level to think about a plan B beyond UNRWA. I think there's a chance that this will happen in the next weeks and months to come.
Because clearly there is a momentum, and when we look at the countries who are promoting this right now, they're usually considered to be the most neutral and soft-spoken countries in Europe, looking at Netherlands and Sweden, and of course Switzerland is not even part of the EU. So let's hope that this will go forward in a constructive way. Looking at perhaps the most central question right now, and something where people don't necessarily want to speculate, but nevertheless, Gaza, where, as you mentioned rightly earlier today, that number one priority would be to get the hostages back safely, something we hope for and pray for every day. But also the future of Gaza, and of course, allow me to bring in the 47th president again and his plan for Gaza. As we understand it, meaning that the population would have to be resettled in neighboring countries, and there will be a complete rebuilding of Gaza in what President Trump has described as a new Dubai. And I understand you have to be careful as the chair of the European delegation to Israel, but do you have any comments on the Gaza situation?
Well, I think it is a good moment for unconventional ideas because we see that nothing is as it used to be. So the whole situation has been, toppled down. So we need new ideas. I think even the mantra of the two-state solution, when I visited Israel at the beginning of the year, it's like a mantra which is repeated but which is void. So we have to come up with new solutions. I would call it a very unconventional solution of somebody who's dealing with real estate. And there was no follow-up on that. And of course, the reactions from Jordan and Egypt were not very, I would say, receptive. So I would rather, deal with a scenario where, Gazans would live where they live, and to reconstruct, the Gaza Strip. But why not make it into a Dubai? So I mean, this doesn't, I think the most important thing is now to have security guarantees for Israel, because I think beyond the economic relaunch of the area, we need security guarantees. And the minister also today made it very clear, Hamas needs to be, fought until the end. So I mean, it's difficult to say because we see every day that new Hamas, soldiers are coming up. It's a very difficult battle, but I think that's the main concern now, to root out terrorists in the Gaza Strip, because only if there is really no more terror there, and that the Palestinians, also those the civilians who want to have a peaceful life, can finally breathe and think about a different future than they had now. And I think for this kind of, and also Minister Barkat said, there are Palestinians who want to go this way, who want to have peace, who want to have prosperity, who want to change the course. And this is, I was listening very carefully, and I would be also happy to identify those interlocutors with whom we can think about a political future and then also an economic reconstruction of Gaza.
Because one of the things that struck me in his speech today was something I never actually heard before, and
the multiple Emirates.
Multiple Emirates, and maybe he shared this for the first time ever here, meaning that because the Palestinians are basically a tribal society, and to say that it's not just only one people, but they're quite differentiated. I was not planning on raising this issue, but do you have any immediate, other than to say that it was interesting?
No, I mean, I think it's we need a lot of new ideas. I think we need new ideas, and I was really positively surprised that even the Minister for Economy is thinking about political solutions. This is very important. I think we need to think out of the box.
Of course.
And I think that's very inspiring, because actually in Brussels, they're not thinking out of the box yet. And this is a problem. And at home, now, Europe is dealing with Ukraine, so they're completely absorbed by that. So I think it's very good to have these kind of ideas, and you can think about it and chew on it and stuff like that. But I think, also how it's presented, Israel is such a sovereign and resilient country, which puts, also diplomatic, or these ideas on the table. So, but also, the regional players are very important there. And I think there is a scheme, there, which with which we can work. We don't start from scratch,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we need now, you know, a
Yeah.
platform or forum where all these new ideas can be
course.
discussed.
Yeah.
This is very important. So I think in this regard, maybe Europe
Yeah.
can play a role just as a, you know,
Yeah.
a framework, as a platform where all these ideas can be discussed. Because, as I said, there was no follow-up, you know, after the statement of President Trump to make a Riviera there. There was no follow-up, so we have to now, work with this. But I think first, you know, the most important thing is, as you said, hostages release, security guarantees, peace on the ground, and then slowly, you know, the political process and the economic reconstruction. We are not yet there, unfortunately.
Exactly. Let me make a slight detour, considering that this coming Saturday is the International Women's Day. And when we look back at October 7, 2023, and the undescribable atrocity, many of them against women. And we don't have to describe anything of it because it was filmed and people can go on the internet and see what happened. But what has been a great disappointment for our Israeli friends is, of course, how the international women's movement had been so silenced. Do you, as a woman now especially, have any comments on this ahead of International Women's Day?
Well, this is really very hard to understand. I fully agree. And there's a lot of disappointment, frustration, and also rebellion against this kind of behavior. I mean, it reflects a little bit the one-sided approach of many of UN organizations towards Israel. And I was thinking about it, maybe also, you know, Israeli women have the image of being soldiers. Usually they are competitive, and now they are innocent and you know, victims. So this doesn't fully fit with the, you know, the idea we have of Israeli women, that all of a sudden they can become in this position where they are, you know, without any power, powerless and completely, you know, exposed. I think maybe this doesn't fit because the Israel society and also Israel women are, you know, resilient and combatant. So maybe this is also just an explanation. But it's, of course, completely unjust and unfair. And we have to also, I have two colleagues also in the European Parliament, Céline Ima and Alice, who also will, you know, articulate this around International Women's Day. And also the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, is very aware of this. And we will, on Monday, we will have also an event here in the European Parliament and we'll also discuss about these issues and how we can, you know, just say, regardless of the ethnicity, nationality, you know, violence against women is violence against women. It has to be described like this and has to be blamed like this.
And clearly a woman is a woman regardless of nationality and ethnicity. Finally, coming back to your new position as chair of the EP delegation to Israel, can you share some of your dreams, thoughts about how EU relations with Israel could be improved during the next, 4.5 years?
4.5 years, yeah, you know. We are at the beginning of the term, so this is a nice period to have ahead of us. And I'm really looking forward to have a lot of exchanges. And as you said, not only on the issue of war and peace, but also on many other, you know, issues, sectors of also Israel society, religion, and so on. So I would like to show this diverse picture, which is Israel is, and also, you know, to inform colleagues, because very often they have a wrong picture of Israel in their head, and we could see it also today. They can, you know, there are critical questions around, but it's best if you bring people together. You know, if real Israelis come over to Europe and, you know, answer these questions with a lot of very good arguments. And if we go there and talk to Israelis on the ground, how much they are affected by this situation of being squeezed there and having these security threats all over the place, I think this is the most, to have this exchange in information. And I would hope that we would have a more pro-Israeli stand at the end of this term, that we can change in some of the colleagues' minds and mindsets to be more critical, to be more differentiated, and to be more open for dialogue, because I think the worst is just to repeat hatred and stereotypes. I think I would like to, walk this path to have a more open and constructive parliament at the end.
And if I may, I think you are the best person positioned to see that change, given that you are from Germany, from Berlin, and a prominent member of the CDU. And of course, for Israel and for Europe, we always count on Germany to be this historic friend, and I think you are an amazing expression of that. I also want to thank you for your partnership for our ECI Young Leaders Academy. And I know that
they are the future.
They are the future, and they were very impressed and encouraged by from having met you during our last academy, and they will come back in the month of May, and we're looking forward to meet again then. So thank you so much, MEP Hildegard Bentele. This has been the European report, and we have looked at the changes which we are facing now in the international system and also here in Brussels. And we look forward to hearing from you. Please feel free to like this video, to share it with your friends, and then we'll see you next month again here in the studio of the European Parliament in Brussels. Until then, shalom.
Shalom.